So Northwestern obviously got their win on Saturday, 31-21, but the story is the offensive line.
You are Locked On Northwestern, your daily podcast on the Northwestern Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Northwestern, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Carter Bird, and thank you for making Locked On Northwestern your first listen every day. You can find us wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, really anywhere we are available. And then we're obviously on YouTube, so you can go there to subscribe and not miss any of our daily episodes. Now, the story of this game on Saturday was absolutely the offensive line. All the awards may have gone to guys like Ryan Helinski, guys like Cam Mitchell, guys like Luke Akers, who I would argue deserves it just as much as the offensive line. But the offensive line is the reason why Northwestern won this football game. And that's what we're going to talk about. I mean, when you get out there against an opponent that is very hyped. The transfers that Nebraska had brought in O'Shawn Mathis, and Stephon Wynn, and all of these players with all this great, tremendous size that were supposed to be the strength of this Nebraska defense. When that's what's going on, and then you bring back your four starters, and led by your tackles, Wiedeker and Skoronski. Obviously, Skoronski, everyone knows about. Future first-round draft pick here. And then you just silence that Nebraska front. That is the key. There's only one sack in the game. You ran the ball. I'm not counting the 3-team rushes for -8 yards at the end, the kneeing it out. But you run the ball 44 times for 222 yards at a 5.05 yards per carry clip. And that's the story of the game. And you saw very big holes being created all over the field. I mean, you saw Evan Hull and Cam Porter. It maybe took a few carries. To kind of get into a flow. But once they got there, they were ripping off big chunk plays. I mean, your two starting running backs carried it 41 times for 213 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, they were going at a 5.2 yard per carry clip. You had Andrew Clare get a carry in there, the third string guy, your other team captain with Evan Hull on that offense. I mean, he and Skoronski on the offensive line, and he had a carry for 6 yards. I mean, really, whenever it didn't matter who was in, they were getting yards because that offensive line was getting pushed, and that's something that you hear Pat Fitzgerald talk about with his teams. He really wants to win that 6-inch war, and that's what his team preaches. I mean, that's what his staff preaches. That's what the strength staff preaches, and that's the key. And Northwestern was able to do that. I mean, Ryan Helinski. I mean, we will talk about what he said about it here in a second, but he looked very comfortable. He looked like it was coming easy to him because of the time that he had back there. I mean, at no point was he under duress from jump. From the first snap, he looked comfortable because he had the time. He had the time and could have the patience to make sure he delivered the ball when and where it needed to go. And, I mean, that's the story of this game is Northwestern's offensive line won this game for Northwestern. Northwestern, behind that offensive line, was able to generate 528 yards of offense. I mean, that is a ton, especially for a team that's not normally known for its offensive output, but they got it done. They got it done in the air, and they got it done on the ground. I mean, when you run for 214 yards on a team in the Big Ten, that's a statement. That's a statement. And last year, keep in mind, you only average 322 yards per game, and you only rush for 145. So you're already 70 yards up on that, and you're throwing for 140 more yards. But you have over 200 more yards of offense than what you averaged last season. I mean, it cannot be understated how the offensive line absolutely paved the way for this Northwestern team. I mean, against Nebraska last year, you only were able to run for 37 yards. You threw for 256, which is solid. But when you're running for 37, that's not going to get it done. I mean, and so the story is the difference up front physically from last year to this year with this Northwestern team. You saw last year they couldn't win that 6-inch battle. They couldn't move people 6 inches, which is what Pat Fitzgerald preaches, and they didn't have that physicality and that edge, and so you only run for 37 yards. Well, this year, you run for 180 more yards. It's a completely different team when they're that dominant. So that is the absolute story of this game. It is Northwestern's offensive line came to play. They brought their lunch pails, and they went to work. And they were the perfect embodiment of what Pat Fitzgerald says about his team at this school. It's a white-collar school, but it's a blue-collar mentality, and it's a blue-collar team. And they come to do the work. They come to win that 6-inch battle, and that's the story of the game. Coming up here in a second, we're going to take a look at what Pat Fitzgerald, Ryan Helinski, and Evan Hull said immediately after the game about the offensive line. And so that's what's coming up in just a second. But first, BetOnline is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all of the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week's games. BetOnline is also your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so now we're going to dive into specifically what did Pat Fitzgerald and Ryan Helinski and Evan Hull say about this offensive line, because I think this says a lot about what this team's mentality is, where they want to win games, what they plan on doing the rest of the year. And it starts in the post-game press conference where Pat Fitzgerald stood up there and he said, look, we won the 6-inch war, and you have to be able to have that ability to move people 6 inches. And that's the name of the game, especially in the Big Ten. It is a line of scrimmage game, and it's a line of scrimmage league, and Northwestern went and won that on Saturday. And he said that it's not shocking. It's not shocking because that offensive line group has had a very, very strong offseason coming into the season, anchored by those tackles, Skoronski and Wiedeker, who both had great games. I mean, especially Skoronski. Skoronski was unbelievable. But he highlighted Wiedeker specifically because Wiedeker chose to come back. He didn't have to come back. And Fitz acknowledged that. And he said, but the leadership that he added to that team, to that offense, to that offensive line group is invaluable for the offseason that they had. He said that last year, things got really banged up. 10 guys went down at varying points in the year. And so they weren't healthy. Well, now they are. And those bookend guys that are so vitally important that anchor this offensive line helped pave the way, helped lead the rest of that group into 2022. And heck, when you have that many injuries last year, you do develop a little bit of depth. I mean, Fitz said that, yeah, his main group went out there and dominated on Saturday, but the second group can play a little bit as well. I mean, they're solid. And he said that the great thing that the the great thing that this offensive line group had, and a little bit of a silver lining of having guys get banged up last year in what was very much a down season, was it created really good competition going into this year, because you had guys, so many guys with experience, so many guys with starting experience. It's really carried over to the first game of the year where Northwestern just dominated up front. He also said, look, conditioning, strength, and the offensive line and defensive line were the difference in that game. And that's going to be something you hear, because he did an interview yesterday with Dan Patrick. Well, that's going to be something you hear about there as well. Moving on to Evan Hull and Ryan Helinski. Well, these two, Evan Hull, when asked about it, he said, look, it starts up front. And the offensive line played a hell of a ball game, in his words. He said, quote, everything we do is props to them. We lean on them to do our jobs. So, look, that's the story of the game. Evan Hull and Ryan Helinski may get a lot of praise for going over 100 yards and going over 300 yards with a couple touchdowns, respectively. But as Evan Hull says, all the credit goes to the offensive line, and that's the story. Well, Ryan Helinski echoed him. He said all the credit goes to those guys. But he said, look, that offensive line in there, those are his guys. Those are his guys. And he said, look, as he even joked that as soon as they get back to Chicago, I mean, he's getting everybody Portillo's. He's getting everybody Portillo's. I mean, he said, heck, even tonight, whatever they want, whatever they need. He said if they need whatever food they want, if they need him to tuck them in and read them a bedtime story, he would. And, it's good to see the quarterback have a little bit of appreciation for his offensive line group. I mean, that's cool to see, no matter who it is, really. Well, then he had an awesome quote that I want to read here, that I have. It's a long quote, but he said, hey, when I can sit back there and be patient with the ball and see the field as a quarterback, that is the best feeling. Because like today, I felt so calm in the pocket. I felt like I could see the whole field. When that happens, and when that offensive line plays like they did tonight, I mean, it's special, especially pass blocking and run blocking. Seeing gaps as a quarterback, it's kind of crazy, because those gaps must be pretty wide. They played a hell of a game tonight. A lot of the credit absolutely goes to them. Let's be honest. The faces of this offense are going to be guys like Ryan Helinski, Evan Hull, Cam Porter, even Malik Washington, and maybe Peter Skronsky. But it's that offensive line as a unit that is going to drive the success for this Northwestern offense the entire season. And that's the story. And so, it's not going to change. It's going to be the same story the whole year. Can that offensive line dominate an opposing defense the way they did Nebraska? That's the story. And Pat Fitzgerald, he went on Dan Patrick yesterday. He said, he was asked specifically about the run game in a college game that is increasingly more and more passing, kind of like the NFL game. And he said, look, you have to know who you are on offense. You have to control the line of scrimmage. You have to play complementary football and control the clock. And that's their goal when they run the ball like they did, when they run for over 200 yards on a team like Nebraska. And he echoed that statement, white-collar school with a blue-collar mentality. And he said, look, you have to be tough and physical to run the football the way that they did on Saturday. You have to, the lack of strength and conditioning in 2021 showed up in last year when they went 3-9. They didn't have the edge. They didn't have the strength. They didn't look like a typical Northwestern team. Well, this year, everybody got in the weight room. They were able to get back in that football building that I'm going to keep harping on, because I think that's probably a lot of the root of why this Northwestern team is being overlooked, is people don't understand, aren't properly weighing the value of being able to get into their strength building. I mean, he said, look, this year on Saturday, we look like a Big Ten offensive line and defensive line, and that's the story of the game. They can compete in the trench. They can win in the trenches, and as they showed on Saturday, they can dominate in the trenches. And I mean, look, he said that Nebraska defense is going to be good, but I mean, obviously Northwestern's offensive line handled them on Saturday. He said it was probably good that they caught Nebraska early, but I'm not sure that offensive line, if they play at the end of November, with what we saw on Saturday and how that offensive line asserted its will, I'm not sure the story changes much on offense. All right, so coming up here in just a second, we're going to take a look at what did the national media say about this Northwestern offensive line, because they got some attention, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about just like how shocking it was to some of these national media people that this Northwestern line did what they did. All right, so starting off, we're going to start with Nick Baumgardner, of a senior writer for The Athletic. He said, look, this was a huge day for Kurt Anderson, the Northwestern offensive line coach. He said Skoronski looks every bit the part of a first rounder and is going to be just another one of Kurt Anderson's first round offensive linemen. And that unit showed up and played the full 60 minutes, which is exactly what you want, exactly what you need. But then we start dipping into some of the more offensive line centric guys on Twitter, starting with Mike Golick Jr. And look, he was tweeting the whole game about this one. And he said the Northwestern offensive line was, quote, bullying Nebraska. And that's really the story here. It's the story. Northwestern's offensive line had that kind of impact. And he said, look, that group deserves the game ball. They were the best group out there. Then you had Eric Mateos. How about this? Eric Mateos, who, if you don't know, is Baylor's offensive line coach. So another college offensive line coach at another Power 5 conference, another really good program with that Baylor team that, won the Big 12 last year. And under Dave Aranda, I mean, very successful program right now, probably has a chance to win the Big 12 in their own right. I mean, he tweeted, look, that Northwestern offensive line, that's a gritty group. He specifically said gritty, and he said that group has his respect. And of course, if you just searching on Twitter, Northwestern offensive line, you're going to come across Kurt Anderson, Northwestern's offensive line coach, trolling Nebraska a little bit because, famously, you had Scott Frost go say, hey, our offensive line's working so hard this year. They're working so much harder than previous years. Their output numbers are 2 and 3 and 4 times higher than they've ever been. And we're puking 15 to 20 times a practice on the offensive line. And that's just a testament to how hard they work and they love it and all this. Well, I didn't show up on Saturday. Northwestern's D-line very much held its own. Nebraska's D-line couldn't hold its own against Northwestern's offensive line. Well, Kurt Anderson tweeted out, and think we only puked 4 times all camp. Became everybody's favorite tweet of the day on Saturday. Got a lot of attention. Even Greg McElroy of the SEC Network and of some radio stuff down here in Birmingham, he tweeted it was the best tweet of the weekend, and it was his favorite moment. And he has a little clip on Twitter if you go look for it. Well, next up, you have Jeff Schwartz, former NFL offensive lineman, analyst for Fox Sports. He said, look, that Northwestern offensive line is, quote, putting in that work. They are, and I'm going to keep saying this as long as it keeps being the case for this Northwestern offensive line, they're bringing their lunch pails, and they're going to work. They're going to work on you, and they're going to physically wear you down. You saw him also tweet, look, that Northwestern offensive line is the best unit on the field Saturday, and was the whole game. Jake Crane of Crane & Co. said the Northwestern offensive line is, quote, so athletic. And I think Cole Kublik here in a second, we're going to get to him. he tweeted out some clips of Peter Skronsky that were kind of freaky athletic plays. Even Frost, I saw the Nebraska beat writers talking about it. Frost in his postgame presser, he acknowledged that Northwestern's offensive line dominated their front. And, for a guy who hyped up his own front, said it was going to be his best front he's had at Nebraska, said they were going to be one of the strengths of the defense, hyped him up, and they dominated. Is that an indictment of they aren't actually that good on in the trenches, or is that a statement, a testament to what this Northwestern offensive line is going to be this season? I think it's more of the latter of those two. Well, you also had Cole Kublik tweeting out clips of Peter Skronsky, and if you are listening to this, please go on Twitter and find Cole Kublik. Go look at the media tab on his Twitter page and just find some of the clips, or just look up Skronsky on Twitter, because there are just so many clips of him pulling, making athletic plays, getting across dudes' faces. I mean, there's one play that Cole Kublik tweeted out where there's a defensive lineman in the hole right where the running back's trying to run, and then Skronsky comes through, and it's like a magic trick. Guy just straight up disappears, and it's freaky how athletic, how strong, and how just awesome that guy is right now. I mean, Pro Football Focus, the college account, they tweeted out a bunch of stats for Skronsky. Saw 39 pass block snaps, 0 sacks, and 89.8 Pro Football Focus grade, which, by the way, for an offensive lineman, that is enormously high. He's number one grade amongst offensive tackles in week 0. Ryan Helinski jumped in on the fun, and when the Big Ten announced that he was co-offensive player of the week, he said, look, this honor belongs to my offensive line. And that echoes what he said in his post-game press conference, because he could not have done what he did without this offensive line group dominating the way that they did. And finally, Pro Football Focus College is back on here. They said Peter Skronsky is their offensive player of the week. He went to an offensive lineman. So nationally, he's the player of the week for Pro Football Focus College. And they said, quote, he lived up to the hype. I mean, what more can you say? I mean, the praise is top to bottom all over the place for this offensive line. And it's the story of the game. And it's why Northwestern won. And it's why Northwestern is going to be successful. And it's why Northwestern is going to exceed everybody's expectations this season. The over-under win total was 3.5. I promise you, we could be talking about a Northwestern team that hits the over on its win total by the end of September. It is that they are the schedule sets up for them. You get Duke in 2 weeks. You get Southern Illinois after that. You get Miami of Ohio after that. There's no reason to believe this Northwestern team can't be 4-0 going into Penn State. And it starts up front with the offensive line. I mean, we talked about what they did. We talked about what they did. We talked about what the people in the program said about it and how much they dominated. And then we talked about all of the attention that it got nationally. And that's the story. That's the story of the game. That's going to be the story of the season. If this group stays healthy, Northwestern's going to go to a bowl game. Northwestern's going to go to a bowl game, and they're going to be an incredibly tough out for just about everybody on the schedule. I mean, they're going to be a hard team to beat, and they showed it on Saturday. And it starts up front with the 6-inch war. Well, that's going to do it for today. I'm your host, Carter Bird. You can follow me on Twitter at CarterBird13 and on Instagram at CarterBird13 as well. I just want to say thanks again for making Locked On Northwestern your first listen every day. We're available wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever. Now for your second listen, go check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, an 8-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NFL season. The local team experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, plus a betting angle from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets, all combining into one ultimate NFL preview. Search for Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So now, keep coming back this week. We're going to start to look at some of the other stuff now that we've talked about the real story that is Northwestern's offensive line. Turning out to be just a big, physical, athletic, mean group that can dominate and take over a game. We're going to continue to look at this game a little bit tomorrow, and then we're going to turn our attention to the Week 2 opponent and preview their game a little bit as well. But I will see you next time.